Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here bright and early. Those of you that have made it, hopefully we'll have a few more joining later. Just a reminder for the remote participants to, if you want to ask a question in the room, please use one of the microphones. Thank you. So the first talk is actually an invited presentation, not by me, despite the fact that that is me, Susan Little. But we have a presentation from Pieter Bots, and he has kindly recorded it. So I will go to the podium and start the presentation.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for featuring this as an invited presentation. First of all, I'm very sad that I cannot be there with you all, so I've recorded this presentation to hopefully be in Lyon in spirit. I will be presenting some of the work we've done in the NERC-funded EDAL project, in which we examine diversity in the UK geochemistry community and how this changes with seniority. So why do we care about the diversity of our community? As we all know, there's a large body of research that has shown that an increase in diversity, when done inclusively, increases innovation, impact, and even productivity of staff. We also know that we only use these arguments, why we're active in diversity and inclusion, to justify this to senior leadership. The main reason why we do this is because it's the right thing to do. But we don't have much data on the diversity of our community in the UK or worldwide, nor how this changes with increase in seniority. So we set up a voluntary anonymous survey, which we distributed to the UK geochemistry community. This survey included 4 sections. The first was to create an anonymous identifier code for potential follow-on surveys, the second on the geochemistry research area of the participants, the third on the identity of the participants, and the final one on their career progression. In all questions, we allowed participants to select multiple options and allowed them to self-describe. To note, this is a voluntary survey, which is more likely to be completed by those who have a vested interest in the topic of the survey, which in a diversity and inclusion survey are likely those that belong to one or more minorities. So it is likely that the absolute numbers in the results of this survey will exaggerate the diversity of our community. But from discussions with our co-investigators on this project with a social science background, it is expected that any trend that emerge from a survey like this are representative of the trends in our community. In order to ensure anonymity of our participant, we have followed the HESAC guidelines, which includes suppressing categories with between 1 and 4 responses and visualizing these categories using a star, asterisk, and in any category with 5 or more responses, these were rounded to the nearest 5. To calculate the percentage of the responses for data visualization in categories with 5 or more respondents, we use the unrounded numbers. Our results show that we work in a wide variety of geochemistry research areas, and many of us work in multiple areas of research, including in more than 6. Because of this, I thought that an interesting way of visualizing this information is in a network plot. In this network plot, the numbers refer to the geochemistry research area on the left, and the size of the circles to the participants in that geochemistry research areas. The connecting lines and the thicknesses represent the number of participants that selected both geochemistry areas, with connections representing fewer than 5 participants not shown. The one thing that I found really interesting and useful from this network plot is that it shows that even the most environmental research areas are connected to the most hard rock research areas, and includes, for example, researchers that work in both environmental geochemistry and igneous and deep interior geochemistry. This to me highlights the importance of a very broad conference, like Goldschmidt, where diverse research areas are being discussed. In this study, we've analyzed 5 different diversity categories: gender identity, sexuality, ethnicity, disability, and a participant's economic background. Very briefly, this all highlights that our participants are a very diverse bunch of researchers with a wide variety of identities and backgrounds. Because of this, there's bound to be participants with multiple identities that could affect their career progression. But unfortunately, we could not analyze specific multiple identities, such as gender identity combined with ethnicity. What we were able to analyze is multiply privileged versus multiply disadvantaged identities. Multiply privileged includes any participant that identifies with maximum one disadvantaged identity and includes, for example, non-disabled white gay men from economically privileged backgrounds. Multiply disadvantaged includes anybody who identifies with 2 or more disadvantaged identities. For example, non-disabled Asian bisexual women from economically privileged backgrounds. Finally, any participant that did not respond or responded with prefer not to say to any of the diversity questions are included in the prefer not to say category. Before moving on to how this diversity changes with seniority, I'll need to mention a couple of words on the types of seniority we've analyzed. Because of differences between different institutes or countries, we've decided to use 3 measures of seniority in our study. The first is contract type, which includes PhD student and fixed-term and permanent contracts. Remaining categories have fewer than 5 respondents, so were excluded from further analysis. As there might be differences in different types of contracts for different career stages at different institutes or countries, we've also analyzed the type of position, which again includes PhD students, but also researcher all the way up to senior leadership, which includes full professor and heads of department. Here we've also included technical and lab management positions representing a different career path within academia. The final category we've analyzed to hopefully circumvent any issue with the other 2 and provide additional information is age, ranging from 20 to 50 plus. The first diversity category we've analyzed is gender identity. First, in this and the following figures, the x-axis represent the percentage of participants in each diversity category, and the numbers on the right represent the rounded numbers of participants in each seniority category. When looking at the employment type, the main thing that came out of our results is that the gender balance appears stable from PhD student all the way up to the lecture reader category, which is similar to assistant to associate professor in the US. Then the percentage of women is significantly lower in senior leadership roles. Interesting, in age there is no clear trend in the data. This could suggest that women are not leaving academia and instead they're not being promoted to senior leadership roles at the same rate as men. The other thing to emphasize here is that in no seniority category we had 5 or more participants that identify with other gender identity, such as agender and non-binary, as highlighted by the fuchsia asterisks. We can, however, highlight that none of the participants that identify with other gender identities were in permanent roles or in lectureship up to senior leadership roles. The second diversity category we've analyzed is sexuality. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough responses to separate between different sexualities and still have enough information to provide meaningful conclusions and trends, but we can, however, highlight that there is a significant drop in percentage of non-heterosexual respondents going from PhD student to researcher to lecturer reader to 0 non-heterosexual at senior leadership level. What's more, from our respondents, none of the PhD students, also none of those in senior leadership, responded with prefer not to say, as highlighted by the lack of the blue asterisks in those categories. The same for the youngest and the oldest categories. The third category we've analyzed is ethnicity. Again, as with sexuality, unfortunately we didn't have enough ethnic minority participants to separate between different ethnicities. What our data does highlight is that PhD students are by far the most ethnically diverse. This is possibly due to international students coming to the UK with funding from their home countries, or possibly ethnic minorities leaving academia after finishing their PhD. Furthermore, for the remaining categories, the ethnic diversity appears stable, except for the lab management and 50+ categories. What I should emphasize here is that even though we cannot show this while following the HESA guidelines, the composition of ethnic minorities differs drastically between the different seniority categories. The fourth category we've analyzed is disability. With this one, to keep trends clear, we decided to group all disabled respondents together for the purpose of this presentation. The main thing that our results show is that the participants on fixed-term contracts and the researchers are by far the most disabled. And for those on fixed-term contracts, this is dominated by mental health issues. Then from research on to senior leadership, there's a significant drop in the proportion of disabled participants, and the categories least disabled are the technical and lab management categories and two of the most senior categories. The category we've analyzed is economic background. Here the proportion of participants from economically disadvantaged background is relatively stable from PhD student to senior leadership, possibly with a slight drop from researcher to senior leadership. What I did find very surprising is that participants in technical and lab management positions are dominated by those from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, while this is reversed for all other seniority categories. Does this mean that those from economically privileged backgrounds don't want to do those important jobs? Or does this have something to do with role models of those from economically disadvantaged backgrounds being more likely in service jobs, or something else altogether? Finally, we've analyzed multiply privileged versus multiply disadvantaged. Here, the main thing to highlight is that the proportion of multiply disadvantaged participants drops drastically from around 60% for PhD students to around 40% in a permanent contract, and to around 30% in senior leadership roles, to around 35% at 50+. One more thing to highlight here as well is that in only 3 seniority categories, none of the participants refused to answer a question. Senior leadership, 50+, and technical and lab management, as highlighted by the lack of a blue star. Does this mean that in those categories the participants do not feel the need to hide their identity anymore, even in an anonymous survey? Or does this mean that those that do feel the need to hide at least some of their identity do not reach those positions, or maybe leave academia altogether? Our results highlight first that we are a very diverse bunch of researchers, but also that we are not retaining diversity with increased seniority. Based on previous work from others and the co-authors' collective lived experiences, some of the reasons we think that this is the case include a lack of inclusivity or a hostile environment, for example, due to unintentional or intentional racist, sexist, ableist, homophobic comments, etc. A lack of fair adjustment with respect to, for example, religion, gender identity, or disability. Biases during recruitment or promotion, And finally, a lack of visible role models can play a role as well. Hopefully now that we know all this, we can start trying to figure out how to improve all this and create a truly inclusive environment, not just a diverse one. Finally, we hope that this will be done more broadly in other research areas, but also internationally. For example, using the results from the EAGGS survey from last year. I would now like to thank you for your attention and acknowledge my co-authors with whom this would not have been possible. And if there's any questions, Pallavi Anand, the PI of the project, and Susan Little are present and will be able to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Right, that was fantastic. I think we'll move straight on because Pallavi is our next speaker. So she can answer any questions you might have for Peter. Would you mind changing this?
Yeah, sorry.
So Pallavi will continue to present on the EDAL project, and she will present on some more aspects of the survey results. Move this up now.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for coming. I know it's bright and early, but hopefully there will be something for everyone here. This talk nicely follows on from Peter's talk because it's the same project, but here we digged a little bit more to figure out what could be the potential barriers for inclusion or also for progression. I must admit this is a very preliminary analysis compared to Peter's is much more in depth. We have to spend a lot of time getting to where we got to with Peter's, well, that part of the project, but this one is fairly preliminary and it needs more thinking, I think. So as you heard, we had a variety of diversity categories that we analyzed. And in this particular presentation, I pulled out a few questions that we had asked our participants to answer. And those started with just to know career history of our participants. And that this one does not include PhD students because we wanted to look at the staff, particularly when it relates to the work environment where they're working. So we asked their educational and training history, and also to support that with their current work environment in terms of whether they have experienced any of the exclusionary behavior. And I know there were quite a few of them collectively asked because that could vary, but that was the fair way of looking at overall exclusionary behavior in general. With that, we also asked them whether they choose to report such behaviors, and if they did, what were their experiences? And if they didn't, then why they did not do that? Because that's also quite informative in terms of the practices and processes that exist within institutional settings. Finally, I thought, it's so much of negativity all around. So we also asked a question about whether they have been praised for their work in their work environment, either internally within the institution or externally, just to gauge whether, they do get some support after all from the community. Okay, so this talk nicely follows from Peter. So I literally lashed on to all the diversity categories that he had done analysis of, so that we could perhaps collectively think about what could be the reasons for exclusions within or inclusion within the geochemistry community. So first, we looked at ethnicity, and just following on the same categories as Peter had described, because so that it's made it easier to digest and I don't have to say a lot of explanations for that. So what we do find actually is, across ethnicity, white ethnicity is pretty diverse in terms of their educational and training within the UK workforce. Ethnic minorities somehow appears to be underrepresented when it comes to being educated or having work experience within the UK. It could be because there are a lot of migrants, minorities coming to the UK to be belonging to the workforce. Then we looked at gender. Again, we didn't have, unfortunately, enough numbers to go beyond binary gender, so that we had to just stick to the man and woman category. And although this number 50% isn't true, I think it's nearly 60%. What we found that the respondents were either had their education or work experience or both from outside the UK, but fairly consistent, around a quarter, approximately a quarter, were educated or have had work experience within the UK. When we looked at the sexuality, again, as Peter said, we didn't have enough numbers to go beyond heterosexual because around 74% of our respondents were from heterosexual group. So we had to look as heterosexual and rest, bring them all together as others. So again, they do have a fairly good spread, but it's clear that within the others category, we have significantly more respondents who had either education or work experience from outside the UK compared to the heterosexual group. When we look at the disability, as Peter said, we had to bring all the disabled categories together, and that included quite a wide, diverse groups. What was clear, I suppose, is the fair distribution at the moment as we see it, because we haven't looked at very deeply, but relatively these different colors vary depending upon the able and the disabled group. We did ask respondents to self-identify their economic privilege because we had no means of checking that. So this is very self-explained category, I would like to say this here. So we looked at economically privileged and economically disadvantaged groups, and what is one thing that comes out, particularly this yellow bit of the donut plot, is that significantly more proportion of economically disadvantaged group have had either education or work experience within the UK. It raises an interesting question whether these higher percentage is because disadvantaged group have had less economic security or safety net, so that they were hesitant to go and gain experience outside the UK, or maybe less likely to have come to the UK from outside for the same reason. In our data analysis, as Peter suggested, that we grouped and looked at multiply disadvantaged and multiply privileged groups. And so the next set of data is for that. And, it looks fairly balanced in the first glance, this one, except for the fact that the work experience of multiply privileged is significantly higher compared to multiply disadvantaged group. So as I said, we wanted to look at the work environment for these groups. So obviously we have done the data analysis for all of it, but we don't have time to go in detail. So look out for our publication when it comes out, where we will look at these experiences across different diversity categories. But here I'm just going to focus on multiply privileged and multiply disadvantaged for this kind of overall results. So we asked the question if you have experienced or witnessed. So this is collective again. It's not just about the experiences, but also if people have had witness of any exclusionary behavior within their academic home or in conferences or wherever really. And therefore whether, and so what you can see is approximately 39% of the UK respondents suggested that they have had such experience. And when it came to reporting, only 28% reported such behavior. Quite a large proportion didn't prefer not to say or answer this question, which was quite interesting. Also, when it came to the report, outcome, so the 28% who reported such complaints, it's quite disappointing that approximately half did not get a favorable outcome of the report. And only 28% had some positive or satisfactory outcome. So as I said, we looked at the same overall experience of exclusionary behavior, reporting, and the outcome across multiply privileged group and multiply disadvantaged group. It's clear that relatively more folks from the multiply disadvantaged group have had experience or witnessed exclusionary behavior. I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone. But when it comes to reporting, it's even staggering that around 71% from multiply disadvantaged decide to report, which I think is quite commendable. Also, multiply privileged, around 50% had reported them. What I thought was quite interesting when it comes to the outcome, that's where you see the difference between the two groups. So if you were from multiply privileged, you had almost 50% chance that you would get a favorable outcome or not. Whereas if you are from multiply disadvantaged group, it's a quite significant proportion did not get were disappointed with the outcome. Now, this perhaps suggests something about the community or the culture that we work on in terms of, who gets favorable outcome depends on what your belongings and identities are, and therefore something needs to change here. So although we didn't have sufficient time to run the qualitative analysis through the through proper programs, but I picked out some of the quotes from the respondents that gives a flavor of what type of experiences they have had with the complaint process. And this is kind of, some of these were occurring quite frequently. So I selected the ones that were quite common in terms of people feeling either bullied or intimidated, for example, when they had reported it previously. So they were pretty disenchanted with the system and they didn't want to do anything else after first experience. Or they felt that, some people perhaps in the privileged identity felt that they don't want to be disclosed or taken forward, and there may have been some kind of resolution amongst the groups who were victim or the perpetrator in that case. So you can see this, although we looked at just quantitatively the experiences, yes, no, prefer not to say, but actually what they said in their qualitative explanations were much more enriching in terms of, it's not that straightforward, yes, no, and prefer not to say. It's fairly complex. So we are going to use all these explanations into some kind of framework. We have produced a code book to then assess different exclusionary behavior based on the comments that have been provided. So it took us a while to get through the code book and test that, but we haven't quite run the entire questions or the explanations through the code book to bring out the characteristics that we are after. Then, as I mentioned, we did ask the question to our respondents whether they received any praise at work, either at work or outside work, perhaps from externally from our others. And it's interesting to see that at least 69% felt that yes, they have been praised for their work, and that proportion is significantly more in multiply privileged group compared to multiply disadvantaged group. I find it really interesting that multiply disadvantaged group, 38%, did not choose to respond to that. I think, to me, it gives a sense of some kind of disenchantment. Yes, I've been praised, but not quite, So because of when I saw that, I thought I must pull out some of the quotes from folks that have said what they have said in terms of the praise, really. So here is a sample of the and different categories from technical staff to lecturer to senior leadership. And it seems like there is a general disenchantment across the board, be it a senior leader, be it other positions. And people said that, well, yeah, there was a praise, but nothing more, which is quite frustrating. And this does spin out, like, at least in the UK, as far as I'm aware, there isn't a very clear progression for technical staff to climb the ladder within that premise. So there is a sense of disenchantment there, that they do get praise, but nothing in terms of their recognition, either financially or progression, just even with the categories of senior something, or just to give them a recognition of what they do day in and out. And particularly it's important for geochemists because whatever we present or talk about in terms of science, a lot comes from the support that we receive from our technical support team. And without them, I don't think our data will be as robust or as good as can be. So I think there is a sense here that we need to be collectively appreciative of more. Okay, so this is it. I just didn't want to summarize anything. I wanted to leave you with that thought. And I would like to thank our team and for really helping us. This was supported by Natural Environmental Research Council through their EDI enrichment project. There were quite a few 30+ projects were funded across the UK. And yeah, it was 6 to 7 months project. It was quite a intense one, but yeah, we made it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pallavi. We have time for a question. If somebody has one in the room, please go to the microphone.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. I was wondering for the fact that there is a large category saying prefer not to say for the work environment. Do you think that people, I was wondering, how do you do for the anonymity of the, how can you tell people yes to get engaged? How do you guarantee the anonymity for them to feel that they can engage with
your
issue?
I think we were, very good question. We were really surprised, even though the whole survey was anonymous. It's just people don't want to say and speak out. And there was no way we could have encouraged a specific part of the survey to be taken more by people. Only thing we did is we really frantically distributed this survey. We had a very short window, 6 weeks time, by which we had to collect the data. And it was post-pandemic, so there were so many surveys going around anyways. And we had launched our EAGGS survey just kind of maybe 6 months before. We did feel a little bit embarrassed to ask for a UK-wide separate survey in this case. But I don't think we have a way of encouraging. So one way of getting more responses would be if we were to run focus group or something where we run for different categories and then collect data that way. But for an anonymous survey, it would be very hard to get response. But I'm hoping with some of the results that we will publish and bring it out, that might encourage people to talk about it more. But other thing we had planned to do, and we will do, is to at least talk about these findings across UK institutions to make people more aware about their practices and processes that can then help in perhaps reporting and feeling safe and supported through reporting process until the outcome arrives. Because a lot of people just get disenchanted with this question, knowing that they're not going to get any favorable outcome. So what's the point of even saying anything about it? So that could be the reason why they prefer not to say anything. I don't know. That's just some thoughts. Right?
Okay, lovely. I think we should move on, and lots to discuss. We will have a couple of breaks during this session, so there will be an opportunity to discuss more. Okay, I'd like to invite our next speaker, who's Adam Jeffery, to come to the stage. Is Adam here? Oh, sorry, he's remote. My bad. For some reason.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Hi, Adam. Yeah, thank you.
Just bear with me one moment while I share my screen.
Perfect.
Okay, is that coming through?
Yes.
Yep, perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak to you today about our project, which is called Autistic Voices in Geoscience. I'll start briefly with a quick sort of definition of autism for those who are not necessarily familiar. So it's a form of neurodiversity, a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition, which comes with a variety of challenges, but also strengths, potentially. And those sort of stereotypical features associated with it are communication difficulties, reduce social skills, that sort of thing. It affects 1% of the global population, estimated. And despite all autistic people falling under this umbrella of autism, it's important to recognize that all autistic individuals will have a very different mixture of autistic traits, which means that all autistic people are to some extent quite unique, which makes it quite difficult to potentially put processes in place to support them. It's also worth noting within higher education, autism is a disability which is particularly underrepresented and underdisclosed. And that's despite the fact that many sort of stereotypically autistic traits are actually, should be entirely conducive to success in academia. In terms of why we're doing what we're doing, a little bit of rationale. So we know disabled students are disadvantaged across higher education in general. This diagram here shows an attainment gap for the difference in top degrees in the UK. So the closer you are to the 0 line, the lesser the difference basically between disabled and non-disabled students. And what these data show you that there has historically been an attainment gap, and actually it seems to have improved quite nicely in recent years, such that there doesn't appear to be much difference between disabled and non-disabled students based on this criterion at least. However, if you start to break that down into different types of disability, you find that there is some data in there. There are some data in there which are hidden by the overall trend. And the one that I really want to pick out here is the green trend up at the top there, which is social or communication impairments. So this is where autism is. And it's notable for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's a lot higher than the others. So the attainment gap is larger in scale. For autistic people, and also it's the only one that isn't actually following this downward trajectory towards the 0 line, which implies that whatever has happened here over the last few years in the UK that has made things better hasn't worked seemingly for autistic people. So this is why we sort of wanted to investigate this area. So the Autistic Voices project, the AVIG project, what we actually want to do is to gather the lived experiences of autistic people within the context of geoscience, higher education, and basically pick out the enablers, pick out the challenges that they are facing, and raise awareness overall, potentially develop guidance and recommendations, and maybe even create the training materials ourselves that could be used to support those people. I've chosen geoscience in particular because, as you will be aware, geoscience is an area of education which is particularly diverse in terms of its learning environments and learning approaches. You can be in lecture theatres, wet labs, dry labs, fieldwork, etc. And that's a part of higher education which can therefore be potentially quite hostile towards autistic people. Just very briefly, want to sort of give credit where credit is due to the rest of the team. It's not me alone. We've got a fantastic group of people from a wide variety of backgrounds. We've got professors through to PGR student, professional service staff through to academic, and I'm not the only autistic person on the author list as well. So we've got quite a nice range of perspectives that we can bring to bear on this. In terms of what we've actually done, we've taken a World Cafe method and adapted it to move it into an asynchronous online environment hosted in Discord. That the idea there being to make it as inclusive as possible for autistic people. We put out a general call across the UK for geoscience-based students. When I say geoscience-based, that's geology, geography, environmental science, geochemistry, etc. We had quite a broad definition, and we got 87 expressions of interest, which was a lot more than we anticipated. We expanded the project a little to include more people, and we randomly selected 40 of those to participate in the project. They represent at least 16 higher education institutions in the UK. And we put each of those participants into one of 4 Discord servers, basically like a chat room, if you're not familiar with Discord, so that we had between 9 and 11 participants in each room. They were then asked to respond asynchronously to 27 questions, which we released sequentially over a period of 3 weeks plus 1 for additional comments. And we also encouraged them to discuss amongst themselves wherever they were happy to do so. And that worked really well. We got lots of good discussions happening between students. Bear in mind, they were all completely anonymous. And we also got positive feedback subsequently that suggested they really felt they benefited from that opportunity to meet anonymously other autistic people. So those data are currently being analysed via thematic analysis. That's 994 individual posts, around 86,000 words worth of data to go through. So unfortunately, I don't have a finished product to share with you today, but I would like to share some of the preliminary results which have come out, some of the obvious themes which we can highlight even at this stage, which we've categorized at the moment into three sort of broader groups: fieldwork, classroom, and training. And for today, just due to time constraints, I'm just going to focus on these two here. So starting with fieldwork in particular, these are the sort of the raw data effectively that have come out of the project. These are actual quotes provided by the participants. So the first one is food choices, which was a theme that came up an awful lot. If you're not familiar with the concept of safe foods, a lot of autistic people do struggle with food and tend to be very specific in terms of what they can and can't eat. Obviously, when we as geoscientists are doing field work, we might be traveling all across the world, encountering different foodstuffs, which may not be something that people have encountered before. And the example here is someone actually dedicating a large amount of space in their suitcase to taking food with them because the anxiety was sufficient. That they actually thought it was worth making sure they have their own food with them just in case. And that's something which could obviously be easily fixed just by providing information theoretically up front. That ties in a little bit with accommodation as well. So again, if you're going to pick an autistic person out of their comfort zone and travel across the country, potentially across the world, that can induce, a lot of the participants suggested that induced a lot of anxiety, and what they were really looking for was a lot more information on precisely where are they going, what does the accommodation look like, how is it structured, can you provide visual information or photos, etc. What does the sort of sleeping arrangements look like? Are they going to be in groups or individual rooms? That sort of stuff. Again, it's not that difficult to provide potentially, and it doesn't have any negative impact on anybody else to provide it. Evening debriefs, we all want to make field work as efficient as possible, so we do tend to make use of field evening sessions. But it's important to note that the autistic participants suggested that actually, having spent all day in potentially quite a physically hostile environment, as well as for them, and mentally hostile environment, they really needed that time in the evenings to be able to decompress and to potentially spend time alone, etc. And obviously that's being compromised because they're not being allowed to get to that effectively. And the same thing applies to breaks. So it was suggested again, when you're out in the field, provision of an itinerary so that people know exactly where are we going to be going, what are we doing when we get there, how is the day going to be structured, etc. Which could that sort of information would potentially make things a lot easier for them. The other major theme, and this is by far the most sort of significant in terms of what's come out of the data, is the request for training. So a lot of the participants suggested that they really would want staff and potentially even their peers, fellow students, to be trained on some level in autism so that the support and the accommodations required become integrated into the university system as a whole, rather than being a bolt-on that's sort of stuck on the side that they potentially have to fight to even access. And they suggested themselves this would increase awareness overall, it would lessen stigma, and I promise you there is stigma. And it's sad that it has to be said, but someone did say it, to teach people that autism is not an illness, because it is fundamentally not an illness. It's just people's brains being wired in a slightly different way. And I'll share my own experience on this one. So this does not come from the study. This is purely from my own experience. So you can attribute such value to that as you see fit. But for me, a major red flag and a major reason why we need training is because in my experience, the people who I have seen being the worst, the least sort of inclusive towards autistic people, whether that be sort of a benign negligence right the way through to potential hostility or even abuse, those people have always been EDI champions or EDI representatives, or whatever the sort of appropriate title would be in each institution. So that's not to say that all EDI people are like that. Obviously, there's a lot of fantastic work going on out there, but the fact that the people that you would be going to as an autistic person to say, I need help, would potentially be outrightly hostile towards you because they don't recognize your protected characteristics is for me a major red flag and indicative of a fundamental need for training. So just quickly to finish things off and cheer things up a little bit, I wanted to share with you a quote which came in. So the final question that we asked was, what message would you like us to take on your behalf and share with the rest of the academic community? And there was one quote in particular which I think really neatly articulated what's going on here. So I'll read it to you. Please be patient with me and take a bit of time to understand me. I may seem a little withdrawn and awkward at first, but that's because I experience and process the world differently to most people. I may not have a loud personality and it may not be obvious at first, but I am passionate about my interests and always strive to work to the best of my ability with things that are important to me. Please understand that my needs may not be obvious at first and I may not seem to need support all the time, but it is very necessary to have support and I wouldn't lie about something I need. Finally, please be kind and know that we are also people wanting to learn and enjoy university, and that I am really passionate about exploring and expanding my knowledge in my special interest alongside others who also love the subject. So I think that quote for me just really neatly sums up, and I think actually demonstrates the fact that there is potentially a real sort of hidden minority of people here who haven't actually had a voice necessarily historically in this, certainly not in this field. So that's hopefully what we can try to change a little bit. So that's my 12 minutes. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Adam, for that very touching, invited presentation. Do we have any questions in the room? We do have a break after the next speaker who's been unable to travel, so we can also have questions then. But if there is a question now, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you for the good talk. I know some training that people get about autistic people is more ableist than necessarily supporting autistic people. So do you have any suggestions on how you can move away from more ableist, an ideology of training, into more that's more inclusive?
Yeah, well, for me, and this is just my opinion, but the way I'm looking at it is to take it away a little bit from the slightly more, how do I want to word this? Take it away from the slightly more prescriptive and methodological sort of approach to training and actually move into something that actually talks about people. I want, as part of this project, to get, if I can, the participants to share their stories and their case studies on a personal level, if you see what I mean. And I think that will show people that there are human beings behind the stories. I know that, I don't know if that's necessarily addressing your question, but what I mean is I just want to get away from that sort of standard, this is how you deal with this disability. You're not dealing with a disability, you're dealing with a human being. So I think if we can provide the case studies and the stories and show that there are people behind the stories, then in theory, that will make the training much more valuable and much more impactful.
Great, thank you very much. I think we'll move on now to our next speaker, who is also online, and that is Rich Pancost. Rich, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah. Right. Can you see everything okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. Right. So first of all, apologies for that I couldn't join you in person. And also an incredible amount of thanks to the organizers of this session. It's been already fantastic talks already, and you can see the great care and effort that's gone into that. And so thanks to all the organizers, and maybe a special thanks to the EAG DEI committee, who's been doing some fantastic work over the past couple of years. Now, we've had sessions like this going back for several years now, and I've always been proud and happy to contribute to those. But I was a little reluctant to put in an abstract for the session this year. And the reason has been illustrated by the previous talks that you've seen. They've been absolutely outstanding. And you can see how the work that people are putting into this, the rigor with the methodological approaches, and the sophistication that we're bringing to it, and drawing on the expertise of other disciplines has been really, really impressive to see. And And I think that's what we really need to do in order to continue to push the EDI agenda and such. And I've really only been involved with one project I think approaches that, and that is the Black and Green Ambassadors. And to be fair, I sometimes feel guilty because I've dined out on that particular project for several years now. But I did decide that there was one last aspect to that project that I wanted to share with you, and that was sort of drawing from that whole experience, drawing from that project and the range of insights that we obtained in Bristol, to reflect back on our institutional practice, what happens in our own institutions, what happens in our discipline, and what happens in our conferences. And that's why, you know, although I'm sort of the sole author on this, because this is going to be sort of like presented into what we as geochemists can learn, I am incredibly filled with gratitude to the people who have worked with me on the project, especially Zakia and Jazz and Roger. So with that in mind, where this all stems from is that back in 2014, we won the prize to be the European Green Capital of 2015. And obviously there's a huge program around that to celebrate, you know, the things that led to us winning that, but also to set the stage to be a more ambitious city in terms of the climate and biodiversity emergencies going ahead. And obviously, if you're going to have a project like that, inclusion and equity are going to be centered. They're absolutely essential to bringing the city together, and they're sort of essential for the movement, for all the reasons that we often celebrate diversity in our own spaces. You need a diverse movement to come up with a range of ideas. You need a broad movement to achieve the political will to make real change, and so on and so forth. However, what we often neglect in talking about is that there's a more fundamental reason for inclusion, and this applies to the same in our sectors, in our institutions, and that is there is a legal and moral imperative to be as inclusive and equitable as possible. And in the context of the environmental movement, there is a thriving economy there, a thriving amount of resource. So an exclusive movement denies economic opportunity, and it perpetuates the racism that already exists in society and already divides the city of Bristol. So there were real reasons why we had to be inclusive, and effectively the Green Capital Year tried hard, but which failed to be as inclusive as it could be. So there were sort of three phases to our green and black conversation. The first phase started before I became involved, and that was really led by Roger Griffith at Ujima Radio. And where that emerged is in the prelude to the Green Capital. And there was already language that was very, very exclusive. The language was very much along the lines of, oh, it is so important to ensure that racial minorities are engaged. It's so important to bring them into the conversation, which of course set up all sorts of red flags among that community who felt that they already were strongly involved with it, with their own initiatives, and initiatives that were not being heard and they were being ignored. So there was an initial stage of simply profiling those initiatives. Where I became involved, working again with Roger and Jules Davis at Ujima Radio, is sort of in the second stage, near the end of the Green Capital Year, when we realized that despite those efforts, there was still a real lack of inclusion. There was still, you know, especially among the African, especially the Caribbean Black community of Bristol, there was a real understanding that it had failed to achieve its inclusive ambitions. And so we had a project called the Green and Black Conversation, where that was, you know, through focus, we dug much more deeply into the reasons and context of that. That then led to the Green and Black Ambassadors, and that was effectively a scheme that arose out of one of the main findings of the conversation, was that there has been a lack of funding to build up a net new generation of Black environmental leadership. And as a consequence, there were fewer advocates to sort of platform and showcase those initiatives that were emerging out of Bristol's Black community and such. So this was sort of a three-stage program. And the reason I presented to that is that I'm going to sort of draw from all those stages some reflections for us as an academic sector, us as an earth science and geochemistry sector, us as a society and such. So these are broadly lessons that emerged from the reports, and they were broadly lessons that were presented to the city as how the city needed to do much better, how the key institutions of the city, such as the University of Bristol, need to do much better, but somewhat represented in a way that you know, sort of reflects on how we as a geochemistry community can do much better. And one of the first was that really, no matter what you may think about yourself as an individual academic or scholar, you are a representative of your institution. And you carry with that the history of your institution's behaviors, whether it be in, you know, the whole institution, or whether it be sort of individual things. And, a classic example was academics who would go out in the community, conduct research, and then disappear, extracting knowledge from the citizens of Bristol, and especially from racial minorities, and giving nothing in return. And that's a practical example, but there's also the political example. Bristol is very much, the University of Bristol is symbolic of our colonial past. The logo for the university contains the emblems of 4 families that built their wealth through the slave trade. And we have very strong historical legacies of that. And that's not just a historical aspect. That's an ongoing aspect of the relationship of the university with its city. As we grow, and we've grown a lot, we have perverted the housing market. We have perverted so much of the city of Bristol, and that has disadvantaged so many marginalized communities. And as a member of the University of Bristol, I'm not allowed to separate myself from that. And effectively, this is another way of looking at the idea of institutional privilege. And I highlight institution here because although this applies to the University of Bristol, it applies to the sector broadly, and it applies to us as an institution of geochemists. And Susan, you mentioned that we'll have a break after this next session. So I imagine maybe Jessica is not able to present. So I do want to just emphasize the fact that in a colonial perspective, the earth sciences has been uniquely complicit in the extraction of labor and wealth from the wider world. So there are real lessons here about how we as members of these institutions that have flawed histories, but ongoing neo-colonial aspects, need to recognize those. And that is just recognizing the many, many forms of privilege. When we talk about our white privilege, male privilege, our class privilege, but we also bear privilege from the institutions that we represent and that we benefit by. And we need to acknowledge that. And that was hard, right? Because during a lot of this, there was industrial action. I wanted to view myself as separate from that. And I wanted to view myself as a well-being representative, well-meaning representative of that institution. But I could not. And more so, even when we consider ourselves, as well-meaning. And this was really the phrase that Roger Griffith really used a lot in the early conversations, is that so many people involved with the planning of the Green Capital agenda were genuinely well-meaning. But the problem is there was no diversity. And we see this with the surveys that Pieter was showing, that Susan was talking about, is that when the senior leadership of an institution lacks diversity, it inherently cannot be inclusive or equitable because it simply does not have the capacity and knowledge to understand the experiences lived by those from marginalized groups. And that creates fundamental problems. And we have seen this multiple times in the environmental sector. In the Green Capital year, a classic example is that we hosted meetings in the city center, and we hosted meetings in one particular restaurant that donated the space for free. Many people from marginalized groups in Bristol felt that going into the city center, and especially into these sort of posh restaurants, was a prohibitive barrier, and that failed to recognize the history of their exclusion from such spaces. And we've seen this time and time again. We've seen this with Extinction Rebellion, and when they launched their incredibly problematic call for people to be arrested, which was incredibly naive if you think about the relationship that Black communities in the UK and globally will have with the police. These are mistakes made by organizations that lack diversity and therefore lack the capacity to be truly inclusive and equitable. And just to really make sure that I'm being clear, white organizations will center whiteness, whether overt or covert, implicit or implicit, will center those perspectives, those concerns, and those solutions. All right, so what do we do? Well, obviously, a solution is to engage with and collaborate and work with the people who do have those experiences. But then so often when we do that, we don't actually pay them. We view it as like a privilege for people from these groups, especially from civil society organizations, volunteer groups, to come and work with the university, viewing that profile as enough. Or we pay them. I assure you, the University of Bristol has, although we have now adopted a policy that we pay all of our partners that we work with in the city, I doubt we pay them anywhere near as much as we'll pay a design firm to redesign the logo or KPMG to advise on our management structure. Right? If we are not paying the marginalized groups that are filling the gaps in our learning and helping them, we are basically replicating extraction and harm through that. So it is essential that we pay and recognize the contributions from those groups. And then finally, when we do so, there is again the obligation to center their priorities. And I think there's many fantastic DEI groups that have done amazing work and such. But often those groups are set up by institutions to bring minoritized groups into the institutional way of being. It sort of sits behind so much of the social mobility initiatives, and especially the US and the UK. Instead, they fail to focus upon the concerns and issues that are brought by those minorities. In other words, it's all about changing the minoritized groups so that they can access the institution rather than the institutions changing themselves. One of the comments that was most telling to me in these surveys is that many people from these marginalized groups, they felt excluded, not because they weren't invited to the events, but they were invited to the events after the agenda was already set. They also felt that their own initiatives had been marginalized or ignored and were not viewed as important as some of the more high-profile white, or institutionally led initiatives. And this quote from Zakia, who was one of our first ambassadors, really summed it up. Is that we are often the uncomfortable ones. Organizations need to come to our territory and be uncomfortable too. Meet us where we are, come to our meetings in our space and talk to us. So I just sort of want to wrap up, this, and I'm not going to go through all of these. These are sort of some comments that emerged from what I was saying earlier. But I did want to sort of come back to sort of the theme of the talk, which is I hope that by sort of showing you something that was very much a community engagement project, that it reflects on how we conduct our own teaching, our own institutional behavior, and our own research. And I know that probably everyone in the room agrees and understands this, but we really have to keep hammering the message home, is that EDI is not an add-on. It's not an additional thing we do, but it's something that must become fundamental and embedded in everything else that we do. And I'll stop there and happy to join any discussion we have later on. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rich. Any questions in the room or online?
I would have a small question.
Yeah,
if that's allowed.
Yeah, of course.
So coming personally from an institution that hosts like these 4 Freedoms Awards and celebrates diversity and inclusion, but is also majorly funded by very problematic and unethical sources, what do you think is a way to move forward? Is it better to use this kind of unethical money for inclusive ideals, or is it better to refuse this kind of funding?
Oh, well, I think that's a challenging question. I think, and maybe it's something that does merit discussion. I think at some point, it's contingent upon the individual. I think we're all going to make different value judgments in that, and it's sort of same in terms of how we deal with any sort of the complexities of basically, being maybe opposed to an extractive and an extractive economy, an extractive system, and yet needing to work within that same extractive system in order to basically survive, to own a home and to have a job. So I think everyone will navigate that a little bit differently. I think in particular, I feel that people from marginalized groups feel a disproportionate burden to sort of lead on those difficult conversations and decisions. And obviously that's exacerbating the extraction of their lived experiences and extraction of their labor and such. Whereas I think if you're from a more privileged group, then you have more of an obligation to challenge where those things are coming from. I think ultimately, we need to recognize that some of the really fundamental extractive practices of the economy we live in and the economy of earth sciences, and especially its relationship globally, is that we have to understand the journey that we're on and ensure that we're making steps in the right direction, and realize that perfection is still going to be several steps away from, it's going to be a ways down the road, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be walking in that direction. But yeah, I think that's a challenging and important question.
I see. Thank you very much.
Yep. Just an announcement in the room. So Jessica, who was our next speaker, sends her sincere apologies. She's actually been arrested as part of strike action a couple of weeks ago. So very much linked to her poster presentation. So she sends her apologies, and she also gave me permission to share that news with you. So our next speaker won't be here. So if you wish to have a quick break, get a coffee, please do come back in 15 minutes. And in the meantime, we can have discussions in this next slot. So Heather, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Rich. I have a question, sort of a little bit of a devil's advocate sort of question. But, you know, a lot of, obviously you referred to the well-meaning people, and there's a lot of those, and they make mistakes, often due to cluelessness, let's say, rather than ignorance. But you know, how, you know, they invite people to their events rather than go to other people's events, probably because they don't know about those other events. So how can we point people into the right direction to find out about what's actually going on, and, you know, that people are actually involved in?
Yeah, and I think, you know, I must admit, one of the real privileges that I had is that the people who were you know, the people who were calling me out for being a well-meaning white guy, you know, people like Roger and Jules, were doing so with a fair degree of kindness and empathy. They were really trying to, you know, and you know, we can't count on that. You know, we can't count on that. But I really benefit from that. And so there were basically people that were willing to go on a journey together and such. So I think that there's two aspects of that. One is, and this really applies to Green Capital, many of the lessons we learned during the Green and Black conversation, that second bit, which was sort of a series of focus groups, it emerged through, and we wrote a report on it, you know, and you can see, we got the reports archived in various places. Never was this report ever going to be published, because anyone who had actually done research in the area, anyone who had come from a social science perspective, anybody from other disciplines who had really looked into this, had discovered this 10, 20, 30 years ago. We were making the same mistakes that were made again and again. So I think one of our obligations is, if we want to be well-meaning, part of being well-meaning is doing the research, doing our reading, learning from other disciplines, being well-informed. So I think that's one of the obligations. It's not going to solve anything, because it can't sort of change, you know, decades of life experience, but it will be illuminating. So I think we have to do our research. And then the second bit sort of comes to that third point that I was making, and perhaps I was a little rushed in saying that, is ultimately you are going to count on people from minoritized groups to sort of like work with you. And that's going to be, you know, an institution like the University of Bristol is going to count on its minoritized, marginalized staff, right, to take on disproportionate roles. But then it has an obligation to both pay them and compensate them. Staff who are leading on EDI initiatives, that needs to be recognized in promotion, needs to be recognized in their pay awards. If you're working with a community, you need to compensate them, you need to pay them. And then finally, you need to listen to them. There's an obligation, you know, if you're going to be well-meaning, and that means you're going to have to rely either on, you know, your staff who will come from minority groups, or you're going to have to rely on the community. Then you have an obligation to listen to them and change yourself, right? And I think that's the thing, is that, you know, if you recognize your flaws and you're going to ask for help, you pay for that help and you listen to that help and you change and reflect. So I think that's how you navigate that. But you know, that's only the views of the people I was working with and what they asked of me, and other activists might have very different perspectives.
Okay, so our next speaker is Gopalan Srinivasan. I apologize, who will talk to us again, I think, a little bit about narratives, and I'll let him take it away.
Thank you. Am I audible? Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And I regret that my co-author is unable to be here today. He is a social scientist. So I will be talking about lived experiences. The main objective of our study is to investigate the everyday lived experiences of an immigrant faculty in geoscience department in a Canadian university, and explore its material consequences. We will refer to this as just as the university. We'll touch upon the methodologies adopted to re-examine these lived experiences. And I will be talking about some of the aspects of societal importance of understanding such a lived experience. Academic institutions are assumed to promote scholarship and recognize those who do meritorious work. Historically, institutions from the global north are held as a gold standard for promoting meritocracy. In practice, social prejudices are known to negatively impact opportunities and progress of the marginalized groups in the academia. Marginalized groups are not given the same credibility sometimes and their intellectual authority as their counterparts. We have looked at lived experiences through conventional qualitative research method of case study. Specifically, we have taken the approach of cataloging a cosmochemist's lived experience as an immigrant faculty and subsequent racial categorization during his time at the Global North University's Geoscience Department and unpacking the material consequences. So, the EDI policies of universities are designed to combat discrimination and promote inclusivity. These policies often target words and behavior that can be easily determined to be discriminatory. However, systemic discrimination occurs in complex ways which are not easily discernible as it is unfolding. In the moment, you may not be able to understand your own experience, or you may have your concerns not heard. We can use the concept of epistemic injustice to understand these phenomena. Philosopher Miranda Fricker coined the term epistemic injustice, which is also the title of her book. Fricker divides epistemic injustice into two types, testimonial and hermeneutical. Testimonial injustice occurs when prejudice causes a listener to assign lower credibility to the speaker's word or knowledge. Hermeneutical injustice occurs where there is no framework to interpret the lived experience of a marginalized person. The lack of collective interpretative resources puts the marginalized at an unfair disadvantage to make sense of their social experience. Justice Abella report of 1984 provided guidelines for making workplaces more inclusive. The 2017 book, The Equity Myth, acknowledged some improvements, but that faculty makeup still did not represent the population. The authors observed the lack of documentation of lived experiences of marginalized academics as a drawback in developing a holistic understanding. The context for this case study is that scholar was hired at this university in 2003, the same year in which a committee was instituted by National Association of Teachers to investigate allegations of systemic discrimination and bias in a very high-profile dispute spanning 15 years. A racialized geophysicist was denied appointment as a tenure-track faculty several times. This case was reported in Nature multiple times and also in other publications. Many faculty members denied any discrimination and were against any kind of resolution in favor of the geophysicists. Some believed in a resolution. They believed that it would enable the geophysicists to unfairly leverage any alleged discrimination in future. It was in this context the scholar was hired as a faculty from India as the first racialized tenure-track faculty in Geoscience department, and he was the only one during his years within the department. When the scholar was hired, he was given adequate startup grant for a TIMS instrument. For sample preparation, he was assured of access to a clean lab and personal support from another lab that was being moved to the department to be managed by another staff scientist. This lab was being given the monies for building clean chemistry lab. However, once the scholar arrived in Canada, he was denied access to those promised clean lab resources. On a scale of $1 million, 65% was covered for the TIMS, for which there was a grant. It was the remainder of 35% for clean lab construction or the required labware that there was a shortfall. He was never given adequate funding to make up for this contingency, and his research using TIMS could not start till the labs were built or labware acquired. To demonstrate what this meant, the scholar had to build his own sample preparation facility with ad hoc support. These photos show the state of the chemistry lab prior to and during modification. For example, the rusted ducts were replaced with PVC ducts, HEPA filter modules were mounted on T-grade, and clean room tiles had to be installed. 2.5 years later, the clean lab was finished. This took away a significant amount of time from the scholar's research activities. In an optimal situation, in a 48-month run-up to tenure, it should have taken about 30% for lab building and at least 50% for research, and the remainder for other things. This pie chart shows the actual breakdown of time during the 4 years leading up to tenure. For example, 60% was spent on lab building, another 27% was built in actually remedying a situation, which I'll explain. But for example, those who got adequate support would have been able to spend at least 50% on actual research. Instead, the scholar was effectively left with no time for research production from his own lab because he was caught up managing interference from the department. For example, to get his lab running, the scholar acquired labware from an institution that had discarded it, and this was one of the only affordable options. Based on a claim from the scholar's former associate, the department removed all the labware despite protests and rendered the lab dysfunctional. The associate's claim was later debunked by the European institution. The scholar tried to regulate access to his laboratories to prevent contamination of his meteorite samples. This took 18 months due to delays from the administration. On the other hand, other faculty were given security on asking. These are instances of testimonial injustice where scholars' requirements and needs or concerns were not heard. On top of it, there were several degrading comments that were there consistently as chatter within the department. This led out of frustration or out of anxiety. This led some students to leave the scholars group. Despite the obstacles, the scholars succeeded in getting 3 proposals funded, one for TIMSS, another for operating grant, published 6 papers, one was in preparation. There were several international collaborations, one of which resulted in a breakthrough paper on hafnium tungsten systematics. And some methods paper were also in progress using the TIMSS. Not accounting for the obstacles that the scholar had faced, the tenure review largely hinged on the TIMSS lab operation and student supervision. The negative decision was challenged, which brought to light several irregularities and the dehumanizing caricature of the scholar, which was incorporated as objective assessment. For example, the caricature undermined his knowledge of TIMSS as being 30 years out of date and characterized the scholar as an amateur compared to others. The papers from the iron probe were characterized as ordinary, although some of them were seminal. Any and all peer recognition was attributed to social and political factors. After challenging the tenure denial, the decision was annulled. The scholar was allowed to reapply for tenure. However, the environment in the department was still quite toxic. The scholar decided to move to his country of ethnic origin in Global South for the sake of his health and family well-being. He was hired at a senior position in an institute where all interactions and feedback were positive during the hiring process and prior to joining. To facilitate the scholar's research, the university offered the scholar the labs that he had spent more than 3 years building as a gift. The institute supported the relocation of the labs. However, after the scholar joined, he was trying to make arrangements for the labs to be relocated, things took a turn. Questions and doubts were raised about circumstances of the gift, about the scholar's tenure denial, productivity from labs, and student supervision. Information they should normally not have been privy to because the tenure file is a confidential one in North America. That the tenure decision was also annulled due to negative bias, etc., was never a factor to be considered. The scholar was told by the administration that he would be given 4 walls for building the same sample preparation lab. This was a deja vu moment. Moreover, the scholar was never asked by anyone at the institute to explain the circumstances under which he was working at the university or why he chose to leave. The institute administration assumed that the scholar had left because he was unsuccessful. Ultimately, the gift was rejected and the services terminated. When the scholar's employment was terminated, it was a very peculiar situation. Why would an institute hire him at a senior position, commit support only to backtrack and start bringing up comments about tenure process and events that had transpired in a far-off country for which they had no context, to which they should not have access to. Clearly, selective information had been communicated from one institution to another. This information became focal point when the labs were offered as a gift to continue research. Ultimately, the labs remained in the same place, and they continued to serve some of the people who had spent years undermining the scholars' work. To understand, how do we understand all this in a global context? Institutions in the global north have more resources and power, vis-a-vis those from the global south. By aligning with academics from global north institutions, without giving any credibility to the scholar, academics from the global south try to achieve proximity to this power. There might even be unspoken incentives in terms of collaboration and publication opportunities. So, as pointed out earlier, the material consequences for the scholar at an individual level were loss of employment, reputation, emotional and physical stress. The concepts of testimonial and hermeneutical injustice allow us to understand how difficult it is to comprehend and explain the injustice one faces to those in power. Sharing this and the scholars' stories and other people's stories increases awareness within the community and academics at large. The lived experiences allow us to appreciate the complexity of these situations and the reality that bringing up complaints doesn't necessarily solve the problem always. Hopefully, an awareness of these injustices will pave the way for collective reflection and measures to ensure equitability for all groups in terms of resources, access, and accountability for those in power responsible for abuses. I thank my author, Luis Escobardo, and I thank my family and friends. I would be happy to take any questions.
Any questions or reflection? Okay, thank you. Thank you. We should move on now. Yeah, thanks for sharing. So the next talk is, oh yes, our next talk is online. So we just wait for Matthew to join.
Matthew, do you want to go ahead and share?
Matthew, are you online?
I can see him there.
Yes, I'm here. I'm just trying to share. If you just give me a moment.
Perfect.
Matthew is presenting on behalf of Dan Condon.
So let's see. Excuse me, Zoom. Share screen.
Do we have to come out from here?
Yeah, because we have to move.
Can you see that presentation now?
Just one sec. Yep, I think so. Yes, we can see that.
Yeah, all good, thank you.
Yeah, you can see the presentation screen. Great. So thank you very much. My name is Matt Horstwood from the British Geological Survey. I'm presenting on behalf of Dan Condon and other colleagues at the survey, Katrina Sabitskaite and Hazel Napier, and other colleagues in this process, Nicola Atkinson and Kelly Veer from University of Nottingham. Kelly is the Director of Technical Strategy at the University of Nottingham and the Higher Education and Technician Commitment Lead for the Science Council. And Nick Agrizko is Senior Talent Programme Manager at the UK Research and Innovation. And together we wanted to tell you about the technicians' commitment and how we're working together to tackle the challenges faced by the technical community in the research environment. So there's at present, UK institutions are engaged in a number of initiatives ranging from conduct and working practices through to agreements on assessments and evaluation, quality, diversity and inclusion, and have signed up to a number of national and international agreements or concordats around research and how we do it. And the development of people and staff is a critical part of this effort. And in the UK, there are two initiatives: the Technicians Commitment and the Researcher Concordat, which we'll talk about briefly. And today we wanted to focus on our experience in getting involved with the Technicians Commitment at the British Geological Survey. So a quick overview of the BGS. We are a medium-sized national geological survey with about 600 staff, 2/3 of which are considered working in the science area and spread over a number of sites across the UK. We have labs covering mineralogy, petrography, engineering, geology, isotopes, geochemistry, and more. And over 100 staff are associated with working in these labs. We have data scientists dealing with data architecture, developing apps and managing data sets. And there's a real mix of the science staff and the roles that they undertake. And we're doing a wide range of tasks from project management through to research delivery, writing grants, and carrying out new research. Technical staff are obviously therefore key for delivering our science on a range of levels. And, you know, however, technical staff have often been faced with a lack of recognition, particularly in publications and grants, so through the normal science metrics, and faced barriers in applying for grants and career progress and recognition for ideas as PIs through the normal grant application process. So we seek to actually outline some aspects of the technician's commitment here and look at the role of the commitment. It's a grassroots effort for the technical specialist community, and we want to demonstrate how we're using it in the BGS and how we're engaging with it to try and improve the lot of technicians in the organization. So like I say, it's a grassroots effort for the technical specialist community addressing the issues of inadequate recognition, visibility, career development, and sustainability. And it's a higher education and research institute-led initiative in the UK across all disciplines. It was launched in 2017 and embedded across the UK higher education institutions and the research and innovation landscape, and recently expanded to include signatories from Australia, so becoming a truly international community effort, and hence why we're pitching to you today as well, to take note and get involved. So at the British Geological Survey, we started getting engaged in about 2020, and in 2022 became an independent signatory to the process. And in a couple of weeks, we'll publish our first 2-year action plan for how we're going to implement some change. So the technician commitment has a very broad definition of technician deliberately, so that it includes really as many people as possible, and many who maybe would not readily identify with the label of technician, but our approach has been to be as inclusive as possible, to cover as many staff as possible, to improve, you know, if you like, working conditions for everybody. And there are 4 key pillars of the technician's commitment. We have visibility, that we're trying to improve, you know, the visible contribution of technicians within and beyond the organization. We want to improve the recognition that people gain either through professional registration and external awards, but also in the grant submission processes, and enable career progression opportunities through provision of very clear documented career pathways. Often technicians find it difficult, as people with technical skills, often the career progression pathways are not very clear as how the evidence base can be built to meet the progression criteria. So we want to be very clear about how that can be done. And sustainable skills is a key aspect of this, that we want to ensure that we can utilize and develop technical expertise for future sustainability of skills, so we have a continued pathway of available skills to us. So the technician commitment is actually closely linked with the researcher concordat. So the concordat to support the career development of researchers. And there are three principal pillars there: the environment and culture, the employment, and the professional development pillar, principles. And they're very, when you look at the detail of these, are very similar overlaps and issues with the technician commitment. So we are dealing with the two together to cover our researcher through to technician spectrum of staff roles, and considering them together gives the benefit to the whole staff contingent. And taking it in this way, it helps us look at a framework for what we can do, and the processes that we have and the practices across the organization, and allow us to be honest about any gaps in those, the nature of the processes we have, and how successful they are. So we recognize that a lot of our technical expertise roles are really quite varied and have a hybrid nature between researcher, technical, and management, and that many, if not most, of our roles are this hybrid function. Not many are pure end members, and that actually the nature of the role being undertaken or the task being done can change on a task by task basis and a daily basis. So our staff with technical expertise are doing all three components within that role. And the nature of these roles then evolves over time. And it may be that you change more from a research aspect to a technical aspect to a management aspect, and back and forth to some extent. But normally, to progress through the organization and through your career, increasing amounts of management is required, taking you away from the technical expertise. And it's therefore, much more difficult to progress to a high level in the organization as a technical expert only. So I think there's some recognition of improvements there. So whilst we're only at the start of this journey, I wanted to just highlight some of the issues or some of the things that we'd identified that we can do now and improve the situation now, but also look at some of the longer term goals. We've had a real groundswell of support within the organization for providing solutions, both from our technician base, but also through to the senior managers and directors, and also a lot of support from outside the organization, from the likes of Kelly Veer and Nika Grisgo, so from UKRI and the technician commitment side of things in the leads. And some simple measures can make some big differences to the morale as well of the staff. And so we're sort of starting there and pushing forward with some of these changes. So under the visibility pillar, we're launching the action plan shortly. We're linking the action plan and the needs here to some of the complementary initiatives in particularly EDI and things like that. So there are overlaps with some of the ongoing initiatives that we have within the organization where we can take benefit as well and get a win-win. We're encouraging technical representation on various of our BGS and UKRI-wide teams, such as the Research Culture Forum, and supporting attendance for technicians at technician-specific meetings and conferences rather than just pure research, but across whatever relevant meetings that there are for people. Under the recognition pillar, we're adopting the credit taxonomy so that we can get better recognition for all contributors to papers and reports and whatever other scientific outputs in the authorship and the acknowledgements. And we're incorporating a contributor field in our corporate databases to record other output types, which might be things like electronic circuit design, programming code, data generations. Under the career development pillar, then, we are looking to increase the networking opportunities for our technicians within BGS and outside of the organization too, and exploring placement and secondment opportunities for people. And we're encouraging registration with professional bodies such as the Royal Society of Chemistry, Science Council, and other relevant organizations, and trying to also spread this across the disciplines, so into engineering and elsewhere. We are also looking to refresh our appraisal process with respect to continuing professional development and develop these clear expectations for technical career development and progression pathways, developing an infographic that'll help people really visualize how they progress and review the promotion scheme criteria for that progression. And under the sustainability pillar, we'll be looking to review the mechanisms for succession planning and identifying skills gaps and single points of failure so we can have a much more consistent skills base going forward, and therefore help people plan their career development, knowing that those skills requirements are going to remain. And like it or not, there are real implications for this kind of activity from the funders. So the technician commitment was recently highlighted in the Natural Environment Research Council's strategic call funding opportunity, where they highlighted the fact that, you know, it was now available, much more available for technicians and any eligible staff to be project leads and PIs on grant submissions. And indeed, there's been some funding from UKRI to set up an Institute of Technical Skills and Strategy to support the development of the technician skill pool within the UK. So how do you get involved? Well, if you're in the UK, please check with your own university, because a great range of universities are signed up to the technician commitment. And so we'll be trying to deliver on a number of actions. And as I say, we're beginning also to get international registration as well. So international members are very welcome. And Kelly Veer at the University of Nottingham is a key contact there. But look to get involved and take part and improve the lot of your technical staff. And you can visit the website at techniciancommitment.org.uk and through various other social media channels here. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Matthew?
I have a quick question. Thanks very much for that. At my institution, they're currently talking about making technicians resign and then reapply for jobs. What can an academic do in that situation in order to get promoted, that is?
Well, good. Yes, interesting. Is that to progress through the banding structure? Because there's
exactly
no, yeah,
exactly.
So well, I don't really difficult to advise in that regard, but I mean, we're certainly trying to make sure that there are no ceilings, if you like, to sort of the structures or no inappropriate ceilings. I mean, some roles maybe are more constrained, but if it's to do the same role and to reflect the skills of the technical expert, then there ought to be opportunity for progression there, and providing that as a pathway will be one of the actions we'll be trying to make sure it's quite clear that it's possible to do that, so that it's clear which roles and activities are constrained for whatever purpose, but when it comes down to the skills and expertise of the individuals, that there's a clear pathway that can show the progression route.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the guidelines. I think we'll have to move on. I'm very sorry. Just to keep. Do you want to go very quickly while we move, speaker? Yeah.
Question about money, and questions about money are always quick. How do the salaries of technicians compare with those people working side by side with them, say the researchers and managers?
The pay banding structure is fairly set within the organization, so it's purely based on skills. So it ought to be, equivalent for the skills that have been, exercised by that individual.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So we have to move on to the next talk. It's about an ocean science summer school dedicated to the transfer of scientific knowledge and capacity building in developing countries, given by Emmanuel.
Would you mind stopping your screen share?
I'm trying, sorry. It doesn't seem to be coming up. I might have to just exit Zoom.
If you click the close button, maybe.
Yeah, I'm going to have to close the window, I think. And probably just leave the meeting. Ah, there we go. Got it. Thank you. Sorry.
You. Right. Apologies. Just want to hide the Zoom.
Hello, good morning. Well, thanks for being here, and I'd like to thank the organizer for this very nice session. Been here since the beginning. It's a very, very important things we are discussing this morning, so I'm very nice of you. Very glad to be here. Okay, so I'm getting. Beside this, I'm an isotope specialist, but today I'm going to talk about the summer school program that we started last year, called CS22, and well, the aim, of course, is capacity building in developing countries. So what CS22, it stands for Chemical Monitoring of Coastal Environment Summer School 22, because we did it last year. And so, we invited 10 trainees from low-income countries in Nantes City on the west coast of France during for a 2-week program. What we're doing in our unit is marine biogeochemistry, marine ecotoxicology, biomonitoring, and chemical risk assessment. Before going to the school, I'd like to give you a bit of a background on pollution, because I don't know if everyone's aware of that, maybe most of you, but still, it's important to have this in mind. So this, this is one of the figures we are now from the Lancet that was given about 4 years ago. That shows that there's about 9 million people dying every year because of pollution. So beyond pollution, what we hear is soil, air, water pollution, either directly or indirectly contaminated people. So that's obviously a major problem to tackle. So when we look at the distribution of pollution worldwide now, so this is the map, an example. This is the lead pollution. You immediately see countries that face this problem, and immediately you see inequality, environmental inequality in managing and having this problem. So you see northern countries, and you see southern countries, as we call southern countries. And it shows already that there's a huge problem here. That's another kind of map I'm showing now. So it's not pollution map, it's management of a pollutant, PCBs. So of course, some of the contaminants are on the regulations, some are not, PCBs are on regulation, and some countries, they do have the capacity to manage this kind of pollutant. There is a regulation, that's the Stockholm Convention, dealing with POPs, so it's a persistent organic pollutant. But in some countries, there is a lack of capacity to manage this contaminant in the whatever reservoir, either on soil, air, or water. This will be the last map I'm going to show you. It's CECs. CECs is a contaminant of emerging concerns. And here we're approaching the ocean. So that's the monitoring, the data that were produced in estuaries concerning a list of different contaminants. So you have PFASs or PEs and so on. A list of very nice contaminants. And once again, here is striking. You see there are almost no data for example, for one continent like Africa. So this is clearly what we call environmental inequality, and the aim of the summer school was first to share knowledge and know-how, to monitor actions, to start monitoring actions of marine pollutions, especially in areas where the data is scarce. We need to produce data and to evaluate the chemical pressure in the ocean in those areas. The second objective was to build a network, international network of experts, so that people that can work together in same regions try to build actions together. So that was the two main objectives of the school. Then if you boil down to operational objectives, so once again, it was 2-week programs. So you see all the operational objectives. So we went on the field, then back to the lab. So we had hands-ons and also lectures. So it was about 2/3 of the time was dedicated to hands-on, so very practical things, and 1/3 to theory lectures. Okay, so that's the program. Just to make you the picture, I won't go through this, of course. Just to tell you that the first day, so that's 2 weeks. So on the Monday on the left here, the first thing we got, of course, introduction, people introduce themselves. But also we had very general courses about sampling and analysis. And also we started to work on a case study, on a zone study. And the next day we went on the field trip on the zone to apply what we've been discussed on the first day. The rest of the week was dedicated to sample preparation, and the second week on sample analysis. So if you go from the field to the analysis, you all know these blocks, different blocks and workflow. Of course, when dealing with low-income countries, the laboratory capacities from the left to the right of the picture is dropping down, because when you work on trace analysis, either trace elements or trace organics, at the end, of course, you will hand with a mass spectrometer, and that's very expensive stuff to, of course, maintain and to run. So that means that we made the focus more on the first steps. So what to sample, where to sample, or to start the sample. Even if you have capacity in your lab, pre-treat the sample and so on. So in a way that the trainees we invited, actually, they could really grab information depending on their capacity and take information valuable for them. So that's the candidates' origin. We had about 100 applications, and it was nice. We had almost 50% women and men. And you could have registered as non-binary, but no one registered as non-binary. But at least we had a good balance here. About half of them was PhD student, and about 30% permanent staff. Most of them came from Africa, South America, and a lot of people from Brazil and Gulf of Guinea. We had only 10 places, so we selected 10 trainees. And we only selected permanent staff, and that was very important for us, because we could have invited a PhD or postdocs, but they could fly around the world and use the knowledge, even in rich countries where they don't need this kind of effort. So the idea was really to target countries, not people, but countries, because we wanted to share our knowledge with countries, and that this knowledge could be shared. So all these people are professor, assistant professor, or engineers. And we produce a lot of materials that they can use and train their students. Some pictures. So as said, first introduction. So we asked for a kind of a self-introduction, 6 flash presentation. So it was kind of icebreaker. So they can introduce themselves, their profile, and their research projects. So we can follow and go on during the 2 week, discuss about their problematics. Lectures is the list of different lectures. So you see some picture of the zone study. So we we showed the map, and then we went on the field the next day. These are pictures of the field trip. So we went through different sampling techniques, very easy sampling techniques and not expensive sampling techniques. So you see here some pictures of sediment coring, grabbing, and seawater sampling with an Niskin bottle, for instance. Then back to the lab, sample prep. So we worked on the different matrices we collected on site, so sediment, mollusks, seawater, and sample analysis with different instrumentation. So for each instrument, important things that we went through instrument description and explained very operational things, how to install instrument, what you need in your laboratory to set up instrument, which instrument to select, and so on. The final step for sample prep before analysis, instrument tuning, method sequence design, instrument maintenance. So it was kind of practical package that was given for each kind of instrument. Before they went back home, we asked them for feedback. We sent them a feedback questionnaire because the idea was to evaluate if what we shared was good enough, and then there was a kind of good training effect. So before and after training, and general questions for the organization, because the idea is to redo it next year. So that was very important for us to understand if we were doing right things. So we also shared all the documentation. So my colleagues produced a lot of slides, 800 slides, an ethical protocol, research, and everything, of course, was given free, because the idea was to be that material should be reused in their home institution. Just some feedback, some pros and cons. So, okay, I said a few words about pros. The important thing is that now we know each other, and we are kind of supporting their development. So the idea is that when they want to start development of new methods, buy new instruments, then they can send us a message and then we can try to help them. That's also the idea of building this network. And of course, if we can help us also in fundraising, so local fundraising, of course, that's also a part of the thing. For my team, as head of the team, it was very interesting because I had 28 colleagues who helped me building this code. So it's a lot of people, and that's very, very nice to do this kind of jobs. Everyone was very pleased to do it, from PIs to assistants. So it was very, very well, very nice. Also, we're in France, and you know, in France, we are not very good at English stuff. So yeah, it's not a detail, but actually we have a lot of protocols written in French in a lot. So I ask all the technicians, please translate this into English. So now we have very nice material for visitor, foreign visitor students. Yeah, cons. Yeah, there are two cons that we had it was a 2 weeks of occupation of the staff and the lab. So of course, during 2 weeks, you do not produce science. You share, but you do not produce science, but still you have to think about it. And yeah, it could be a little mismatch between the trainee's profile and the program objectives, because actually when we started the program, we were expecting a marine chemist and working on trace metals. And of course, in these countries, it cuts a lot of money. I mean, there's something else to do, of course, than marine chemistry. So, so the profile were very general profile. So we had people working, of course, on ocean science on the coast, but either on biological, chemical, even physical questions. So the idea, yeah, the question is, yeah, what we delivered was really on chemistry. So yeah, that was something maybe you should adjust for the next program. Okay, this is a list of all my colleagues that work on that. So you see 28 persons, either they went on the field or and in the lab, or they did different things. And this is the last pictures of the group on the coast. So yeah, again, if you need more information, there's a website here, so you can have some more information about the session. And next year we'll have another one. So if you know interested people across the globe, then yeah, you just follow the link. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. I think it's interesting the point you raised about the mismatch between sort of the expertise that are available in these sort of global north countries and the expertise that are asked for by our colleagues in the global south. And we've seen the same issue with the virtual mentoring program that the EAG and the GS host, is that the skills that we have, or the people who volunteer to mentor, are very different from what the mentees are hoping to find. So I was wondering if you had any insights into how to sort of improve or minimize this gap between what we can actually
what knowledge we can exchange that is actually valued versus just knowledge that we have that might feel completely unrelated to what people want to study in these countries?
Yeah, the thing is that we get, I mean, also some general courses. I mean, biogeochemistry, ecotoxicology was very short courses, so we cannot give a lot of things. But the idea was to give enough material so that they can use it and share and transmit to their students. The thing is that yeah, we're working on chemical pollution, so of course we have to go through this way because the first you saw the map. The idea is to get data from this area, and especially in areas where there are a lot of seafood, much more than European countries, for instance. But yeah, this mismatch, what we decided to do for the next session is that prior to select candidates, we are going to ask what kind of, I would say, courses they would like to get. If they want to spend more time on field or more time on instruments, or different type of analysis and so on. So try to match as much as we can on the needs. That's the thing. But it's difficult always to match completely a program with expectations. Yeah, it's always the important thing is to get the full picture of it, because you know when you're doing trace element or trace organics analysis, it starts from the field. Yeah. So it's very important to secure, of course, this phase if you want to go up to the end of the analysis. So that's the thing. So
thank you.
Well,
thanks,
okay.
Emmanuel. We
Yep.
need to move on. So our next talk is on the African Initiative for Planetary and Space Science 5 years later. David, take it away.
Yeah, good morning. So I'm David Baratoux, and I would like also to thank your organizer for this great session, for you for being here. So I will talk this morning about planetary science, and when you think about Africa, you don't necessarily think about planetary science. It's our motivation to consider that Africa should not be excluded for taking part into the scientific adventure exploring the solar system or the universe. So I would like to talk this morning about what we've done collectively in the last 5 years to promote planetary science in Africa. And it's also our opinion that planetary science is a tool also for training, and it attracts the young generation of Africans toward scientific careers. So we can really rely on this exciting scientific topic to train a young generation of Africans. So first of all, I would like to mention that Africa has very strong assets for planetary science. The first one is the geological history of Africa, which offers many windows in the ancient Earth to understand the global changes, the major crises, the emergence of life, or plate tectonics, and that's currently one of the major outstanding questions that we have when we work on the geological history of Mars or Venus or the Moon. You have a geological map of Africa on the right side here, and you can see all the pinkish areas are very ancient terrains of Paleoproterozoic or Archean ages. So all these ancient Earth that we can explore, and it's currently still underexplored and can be compared directly to what we see on the surface of Mars with almost the same techniques today. Africa is also underexplored for impact structures. You have here a map of the meteoritic impact structure, and you can see that the map of Africa shows a deficit of impact structure. And even the known impact structure in Africa are not as explored as the impact structure in Northern America or Europe or Asia. On this graph here, this is a graph that I made from the year of confirmation, the database on the year of confirmation of impact structure. And you can see the curve in black for the world is the average rate of discoveries of new impact structures. So this knowledge of the collision of the Earth with asteroids is important. And you can see in green, that's for Europe. In blue, that's for America, which is there is a strong dichotomy between South and North America. That's why it's a bit lower than Europe. and in red, this is Africa. So it clearly shows the potential for new discoveries in Africa. Of course, it's not because the asteroid avoid Africa, we have these curves, but it's because there is a lack of training of geologists in Africa to recognize the criteria for the identification of impact structures. I like also to show this map. On the white symbol that you see here are the astronomical observatory that we have in Europe and in part of Middle East as well. And below this map, this is the map of the light pollution. So there is somehow a mistake when you look at this map, because you can see that there is almost no astronomical observatory in Africa, where of course there are plenty of dark sky reserves and plenty of opportunities to build astronomical observatories and to contribute to planetary and space science by observation. So based on these assets and on the fact that the contribution of Africa to planetary science is still weaker than in any other part of the world, with a group of African planetary sciences. We started in 2017, and it was actually initially funded by the Geochemical Society and the European Association of Geochemistry. We started this African initiative for planetary and space science, and we received numerous institutional and individual endorsement. It was conceived as a network and an incubator for more ambitious scientific projects. And I would just like this morning to make some scientific highlights of the result we have so far and where we stand now 5 years later. So maybe the most striking stories that we had was in Senegal. You probably know about Arrokoth. It's a Kuiper Belt object that was the most distant object that was explored by a spacecraft by NASA in 2019. It's very difficult to observe from the Earth. It's almost impossible. We are able to see on the left here is an image from the Hubble Space Telescope, and just a dot. So one important thing to prepare this flyby by the NASA mission, that was the New Horizon mission beyond Pluto, is to observe stellar occultation. And one of these stellar occultation took place in Senegal. And because of this initiative, we were contacted by NASA to see if it was possible to organize a stellar occultation campaign in Senegal to provide some critical data for the NASA mission to take place and for the successful flyby of this object. So we actually did that as an international collaboration between NASA, between an astronomical association in Senegal, and between a colleague from France and from Belgium. We trained people in Senegal. There was 21 telescopes that were sent in Senegal, participation of 21 Senegalese scientists, and we successfully observed the occultation and provided critical data for the success of the flyby, which took place in January 2019. So I like to say that by this adventure, Senegal enters the history of the exploration of the solar system, because it was the first time that it actually directly contributed to the success of a NASA mission. What was more interesting is that after this experience, we had 2 other occultation campaigns in Senegal, and because of COVID, the US scientists could not travel to Senegal in 2020, so they had to rely on the skills and expertise of Senegalese astronomers to provide the critical data for the Lucy mission for Polymele. And you can see on the video on the right here, that's for Polymele. You will see the star that's just blinking here when the asteroid passes between the star and the Earth. In just 1 second, but it provides critical data about the velocity, the size, and the shape of the asteroid that we need before the flyby. There was this scientific experiment was receiving important media coverage. There was about 3 scientific documentaries, and actually the head of in Senegal of the organization of this occultation campaign, Maham Kéré, is now the head of the new space Senegalese agencies. So it's very interesting things going on in Senegal. You probably heard also about the recovery of recently a French meteorite that fall on the French territory. thanks to the International Freepond Network, which is a camera network to monitor meteors and meteorites that fall on the French territory. We are working to expand this network in Africa, and you see a map here of the camera that we have installed in Senegal, a small network of 4 cameras at the moment, and these are on the right, the trajectories of meteors that have been recorded so far in Senegal. We have also a similar network now in Burkina Faso. I also mentioned that what we've done on the impact structure, that's the Lake Bosuntwi in Ghana. That's a real scientific treasure, I would say, because that's a very recent and large impact structure, 10 kilometers in diameter, in all the paleoproterozoic terrains, as you can see on the map here. And we realized that this impact structure is very similar to low-baked or rampart craters on Mars, which are known to be used to decipher the history of water on Mars. You can see the fluidized ejecta here, and so by comparing this ejecta with ejecta on Mars, we hope to contribute to Martian science. I also mentioned the story about the tektites, and was presented by a student, PhD student from Côte d'Ivoire on Monday at this conference. So the tektites are glass beds that are ejected from an impact structure, and there are only 5 tektite strong fields in the world, and one of these strong fields is in Côte d'Ivoire, and is by far the least explored strong field. There was about 60 years that there was no exploration campaign that took place in Côte d'Ivoire, and so I'm very glad to say that today there's the first time that a student from Côte d'Ivoire started again the exploration of this strong field, and he found more than about 170 new samples, and extended the strong field by a factor of 3, about 3. And also observed unsuspected chemical heterogeneities in strong fields. So there was a really significant discovery that were made and published recently in Journal of African Earth Science. And we hope also to contribute very soon to the first known impact structure in Senegal. We are working on the Vélingara Depression. It's a large circular depression in Casamance. And we have been achieved a geophysical campaign that shows here well-defined a gravimetric anomaly of -15 milligal circular, and we hope to have soon enough funding for drilling, because the structure is covered by sediment, by about 100 meters thick recent sediment. So we need the drilling here to provide definitive confirmation evidence that this depression is a large impact structure in Senegal. Just to conclude, I'd like also to mention that in the wake of the AFIPS, we have seen also several initiatives emerging on the continent, which involve generally AFIPS members. We have launched the first magazine of astronomy. It's in the French language. It's for the French-speaking Africa, Astronomy Afrique, which provides some information about what is done in Africa in astronomy and space science, what can be observed in the skies of Africa as well. And it has now 2 years of existence. We have also seen the new association for the promotion of space and planetary science in Africa, and I think the next talk about the ATTARIK Foundation, so I just mentioned here briefly, you will see just after me, the new association in Côte d'Ivoire for astronomy as well, and in Mauritania, that took place in the wake of the AFIPS. And because I'm just back from Madagascar, I was there 2 weeks ago, I'd like to mention that there is a strong participation of Africa to the On the Moon Again event. This event is about getting telescope in the street to show to all people the stars, and in particular the moon. And one of these, so that there are about 60 countries that participate this year to this event, with spots where people who have telescope put their telescope in the street and show to hundreds of thousands of people the moon with the telescopes. We organized one of these events in Majunga, in the north of Madagascar. There was the first edition of a festival, Majunga Under the Stars. and it was a fantastic event. We had about a few thousand of people who could, for the first time, observe the moon at the telescope. Thank you. So, of course, AFIPS is an open network and is looking for more collaboration. So I just mentioned, please, if you're interested, join us. We work with extremely motivated students and scientists in Africa. And by joining the AFIPS, you would contribute to a more inclusive science and explore the African continent and skies with African geologists and astronomers. Thank you. I'm sorry for my voice, which is not very clear this morning, but I hope it was clear.
Thank you very much, David. That was excellent. Is there a quick question? If not, we are a little behind, so I think we might move on to our next invited speaker. You can catch David at the end, I'm sure. So I'd like to welcome Hasnaa Chennaoui Aoudjehane to present on the ATTARIK Foundation. Hasnaa, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I would like to have I cannot share my screen.
You should have permission now.
Okay. I don't see my presentation, even it's open.
Can you just maybe try click the green button again to share screen?
It's okay, it's coming. Right.
Okay.
Yes, that's okay.
And then just put it into presentation mode.
Okay, takes time. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Is it okay for the sound? And do you hear me correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. So good morning, everyone. Today I have the great pleasure to talk to you about ATTARIK Foundation. It's an NGO, a Moroccan NGO dedicated to the promotion of meteoritics and planetary science in Morocco and abroad. So just to talk about this initiative, it's a story that began a long time ago with meteoritics in Morocco since 2000. And it's a result of a lot of work on meteorites from Morocco. Morocco is well known for the big number of meteorites collected in our country. Not only finds, but also a lot of falls. And since 2004, all falls that occurred in Morocco were documented, classified, and scientifically worked on by our team, of course, with collaboration with international teams. So every fall is a field mission, and every fall is a field mission followed by the classification, submission, and a lot of research. So this is a map of the Moroccan falls, all Moroccan falls. So we can see that since 2004, there are a big number of falls that have been recorded in Morocco. And so for most of them, so all those, it's our team that did the work. And actually, it's the biggest number of observed falls in the world, even from countries with camera networks. So what was the strategy that we had in Morocco since 2000? We worked on 3 axes. The first one is the scientific research. Of course, there was many PhD students that defended their thesis, and some are still working on new topics. So those topics cover meteoritics, of course, but we included also impact craters with David, with other colleagues from all over the world. And then we worked a lot on the curricula. We included one course, one in the bachelor degree for all students in Morocco, a cosmochemistry course that is given for all students in the third year of bachelor degree of earth science. And we worked a lot on communication by having many TV, radio, newspapers, interview to make those make meteorites and planetary science more visible in Morocco. And the more important goal was to promote meteoritics in Morocco and to promote Moroccan meteorites in all over the world, because all scientists in all over the world are working on meteorites coming from Morocco. It's easy to get access to those meteorites, and it was important, and it's still important for us to show how it's important. And what is also very important is to have a group of research in Morocco dedicated to these topics. So we, after a long work, in 2019, we decided to create an NGO to make our research more outreach feasible, because with only the university hat, it was not so easy to spread our knowledge. So we decided to create ATTARIK Foundation in 2019. It's hosted in the Faculty of Science Fellowship of the Hassan II University of Casablanca. We have 4 important objectives for ATTARIK. The first one, of course, is the promotion of scientific research on meteoritics and planetary science. Then the valorization of the very rich Moroccan geoheritage, dissemination of science, and developing territories by geotourism. So it's one example of what we are trying to do to develop territories with one circuit, the geotouristic circuit in the High Atlas Mountains. One important activity that we had with ATTARIK Foundation is a museum exhibit, and Soukaina Arif will be talking about this in the next talk. It's something that was very exciting for us, because actually one of our objectives is to having a museum, a permanent museum for planetary sciences in Morocco, and it's not easy to have funds and to convince deciders. So we had the opportunity to have this exhibit that is not permanent, and it's in a mall, commercial mall, but it's a very, very exciting experience. In the frame of dissemination of science, we also had the privilege to write a storybook that is talking about one Moroccan fall. It's Tamdart, and this storybook was in French. Then it was translated. It is translated in English, and we are working on in the Arabic version, and it's just to spread the scientific knowledge in a very accessible way to everyone. And so we also have other initiatives such as having flyers explaining meteorites and explaining impact craters, etc. This is the second edition of the exhibit, and Soukaina will talk about it more in details. All this work is, I talked about scientific research. We have this important number of defenses, of thesis defenses, and research on different topics to have different expertises in Morocco. We also are contributing to the regulation of geoheritage in Morocco, and this is the one decree that we worked for a long time with the Moroccan Geological Survey to regulate the collect and export of geoheritage. So this dissemination is made by our team in ATTARIK Foundation, and this team is made by scientists and many PhD students and many students actually, and even people that are not from the university. So for the PhD students and for the students, this dissemination was a very important way to improve their skills of scientific sharing with the public and even with children. This is very, it's something that is important for them and for us. So we have, of course, a vision for ATTARIK, and so it's to dream big and begin small, and we hope that we will be able to have a permanent exhibit in Morocco, and we are doing a lot of things, but we are still working on improving the science and the outreach made by our team in Morocco, but not only in Morocco and abroad, with the AFIPS, of course, and with the different countries in the Arab countries in Africa. And so it's something that we will continue developing in the future. And of course, the future for our country is all those children from not only from cities, but also from villages in all over Morocco, because most meteorites and most geoheritage is coming from the villages in the south of Morocco, and it's important to educate our youth and their children for science in general. So thank you so much for your generous listening.
Any questions? Yeah, sure.
Hello, nice presentation. I'm Srinivasan. I do not know if you are able to see me. I was wondering whether, you conduct courses for undergraduate students or master's students in collaboration with your local university.
So yes, so we designed the curricula, especially for the bachelor degree, and it's in the national level. So in all universities, for all students in the third year of bachelor, they have a cosmochemistry course that I designed. And in our university, we have a master degree where there is a dedicated course to meteoritics and planetary science and geochemistry and also meteoritics and planetary science.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next talk now. Next talk is on ATTARIK-EXPO, a successful Moroccan initiative that brings open science closer to the general public, and it's given by Soukaina Arif. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm Soukaina from Hasnaa Chennaoui University in Casablanca, from Morocco. So I'm going to complete what Professor Hasnaa Chennaoui said. So I'm going to talk about ATTARIK-EXPO, a successful Moroccan initiative that brings open science closer to the general public. So I will start by discovering what we have in Morocco in terms of geoheritage. So Morocco is known by the largest diversified meteorite collection, more than 23 observed falls declared since 2000. So the meteorite collection of Morocco is the second largest collection of meteorites after Antarctica. They have also unique landscapes that reflect all geological areas. They have also several paleontological sites, such as those of the famous Geopark of Magoun in Morocco, the first UNESCO geopark in Africa, which counted the trace of dinosaurs and footprint spread over 17 kilometers. In terms of scientific production, there are a lot of articles, a declaration of meteorites, plenty publication in geological structure, and also many scientific articles that talk about archaeology and paleontology in Morocco. So good. The Moroccan geoheritage is known scientifically to researchers, but what about the general public? We are talking about non-scientific people. They really know their geoheritage? Unfortunately, no. According to the testimony that were made, it can be identified these problems. So we have insufficient information for the general public. I'm talking about non-scientific people, knowledge dissemination and science promotion, lack of dedicated space for geoheritage and science communication, like museum and exhibition. So in order to address this issue, ATTARIK Foundation launched the first scientific museum, exhibit museum in Morocco. So the main objective of this exhibit is to share scientific knowledge with a large scientific as possible, and promote Morocco's scientific wealth in meteorites, fossils, geology, and astronomy. Also support the awakening and arouse scientific curiosity among young people who are the future developer of scientific exploration in Morocco, and also make information accessible and clear to children and the general public. I'm talking about planetary science, meteorites, and fossils. So, thanks to the trust and financial support to many sponsors and collaborators, ATTARIK Foundation was able in 2021 to hold the first exhibition museum dedicated to planetary science and meteorites in Morocco. This exhibition lasted 1 year, and this is the visual of chosen for this project. And the project, it's namely ATTARIK-EXPO Meteorite Messenger of the Sky. So what does mean ATTARIK-EXPO? ATTARIK-EXPO is an exhibition in form of museum showing sample of meteorites. Most of them are Moroccan falls. They have model of planet and solar system. They have a section dedicated to dinosaur, another one dedicated to space exploration. So this exhibition was located in Mall in Casablanca. So we choose this place to have a high interaction with public, and this exhibition welcoming more than 50,000 visitors and 100 schools in just 1 year. So it's finished at June 2022. So after the great success of this first edition, ATTARIK Foundation has produced a new exhibition museum launched on 2022, in October 2022, and with enriched and diversified content. So note that this exhibition, the second edition of this exhibition, is being held in another mall with a largest, in Casablanca also, with a largest area. And this is the visual of the second edition. So the name of the second edition is Meteorite Messenger of the Sky Origin. So about the exhibition content, so we have more diversified meteorite collection and the paleontological collection enriched by dinosaurs fossil. We add also more models of space exploration section. And for this exhibition, for this second edition, we thanks for our collaborator, we have been able to add planetarium also, which is the largest planetarium in Morocco, and also we do a section dedicated to history of astronomy in Islamic world. We have in this section some like astrolabe, old astrolabe, old telescope, and some paper about astronomy in Islamic world. So, about activities, so we offer different activities adapted to all categories. First, we offer a guide tour for example, for groups or for just one person. We do also sky reading and astronomy inside the planetarium. Also, we do some creative workshops for kids, and also we given conferences for a large public. So the main goals of this exhibition is to making planetary science understandable for general public with a scientific, with our scientific mediator and with a simplified speech. So as you see here, we do some photos and the text is adapted and simplified for to be understandable for all people. So we work also in the digital side, so we make some QR code for all symbols in the exhibition, so you can just scan the code and you obtain all the information in the 3 languages, French, Arabic, and English. And you have also the possibility to listen to the description for each symbol in the exhibit, and the visitor has the possibility also to download the description sheet for each with also 3 languages for each symbol. We create also a VR area, so it's very attractive for children, so they can just make the VR cask and watch film about universe and solar system. So we have a structure dedicated to sharing knowledge. We have open access information, and we have information adapted to all categories and in 3 languages. So we can say that ATTARIK-EXPO activities are perfectly in line with the UNESCO's open science pillar. So we mentioned that open science are a movement made by UNESCO that seeks to make scientific research and the data accessible to everyone and all levels of society. So to conclude, ATTARIK-EXPO brings together the geological richness of Morocco in the single location, so providing to the visitor with unique scientific experience. Thanks to a strategic location in the mall, this exhibition was able to transmit the planetary science to the general public. So the future vision of ATTARIK Foundation is to move from a permanent exhibition to a creation of scientific center research and natural history museum. So we are welcoming you to enjoy us in this adventure. If you want any recommendation, ideas, collaboration with museum or with the organism will help us for developing this project. So thank you very much, and special thanks to organizer for the travel support. Thank you.
Any questions? Yep.
Great talk, Rachel Smith. Where is the permanent, is it, so the, I just wanted to clarify, the temporary exhibit was in the shopping mall. Is this also there, the permanent exhibit, and is it open all the time now?
It's not open because we have like some months in the shopping mall, so it's just temporary, like the first edition. So when the like contract is finished, we are talking to, for example, move to another space, or for example, develop another project. Our for example, place.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So your vision is to have a natural history museum.
Exactly, a research center with the
Natural History Museum. That's a great idea. How are you planning to realize that? I mean, I'm just wondering. I mean, what? How can people make it happen? Let's put it that way.
Of course, by funding, by money.
Yeah, sure.
And we have also we work on the the design of the museum. We have already the design of the research center and with the museum, but we need the money. So and we need a lot of collaboration with another or with international organism to make this project. It's a very big project because in Morocco we don't have natural history museum, a research center with the natural history museum. So it takes time and it takes money. So this is just the first step. The exhibit museum, it's the first step to, for example, develop this project in the future. And I hope so.
Great effort.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? If not, we have a little slot now to kind of just chat. I have a couple of things I wanted to share. Would you mind stopping the share on that screen so I can share my screen? And also just to advertise that we have the Hidden Histories workshop coming up this lunchtime, 1 o'clock in R9, I think. If you've registered, that's great. If you haven't registered, that's fine. Come along anyway. If you've registered, you just get lunch. That's the only difference. And then we have posters this afternoon, I believe. I don't remember what numbers they are, though. Yeah, Hidden Histories is in R9. Yep, so posters for this session are in the poster hall this evening. There's also a virtual social online tomorrow lunchtime at 1 o'clock if you'd like to join that. So I just wanted to advertise, first of all, the virtual mentoring program, which Jenny mentioned briefly. This is something that has been led primarily by the GS DEI team, but also in collaboration with EAG. And we're really looking for mentors. So this is anybody with a lab or with any experience really that might be helpful for folks from low income and low middle income countries can apply to be mentored in 3 different areas, one of which is grant writing and CV development, another of which is kind of running their labs, and the third one is kind of setting up collaborations. I'm looking at Jenny in case I get it wrong. Collaborations in order to do measurements elsewhere. So if you're interested in being a mentor, that would be fantastic. You can find the information on the Geochemical Society website under Programs, Mentorship Program. So that was the first thing I wanted to mention. I also, just to plug, I imagine those of you here have been already, but we do have a booth in the poster hall. I can't find it now. Oh yeah. Yes, it's in the middle. It's in the EAG and GS lounge, and we have several posters there. I don't know if you can see. This hasn't worked, has it? Anyway, never mind. So we have a couple of nice posters, one of which is on the DEI survey results, which got briefly mentioned. So there were a couple of lovely presentations for the UK survey, but we also have the EAG Geochemical Society survey, the results of which have just been kind of shared with the community. So please do come by, and you can find more information about that on the EAG DEI website. So, is there anything else you wanted to add? I'd like to thank all the contributors to this session once more. It's been really a great session. And yeah, if anybody has any comments.